So FNAF Into the Pit is a game that sees you take control of a child named Oswald, who discovers a time-travelling ball pit and then gets chased by an evil bunny. Now, as confusing as that sounds, and the fact that this is going to be a non-spoiler review, I do actually find the story of this game to be one that's relatively fine. It's easily acceptable. I do want to mention that I feel like unless you're a FNAF nerd, if you absolutely love FNAF, and this is coming from somebody who actually doesn't mind FNAF, and I do keep up with FNAF quite often, but unless you're really hardcore in the community, I feel like you're going to find this story either mediocre like I did, or quite lackluster. I feel like this game was made specifically for the absolute people who adore the franchise, and I know the game is based off a book. The gameplay of this game is pretty poor in my opinion. I mean, the going back in time mechanic with the ball pit is rather interesting, albeit there's no reason to have a free roam around the map, so it's not like you really have a choice. It's more story related, like it tells you to go in the ball pit, go outside of the ball pit. That being said, towards the end of the game, and it's not a very long game, but towards the end of the game, I feel like the gameplay loop is just rather poor. I feel like it gets to the point where you may start to get rather bored of doing the same thing over and over again, because the gameplay loop never changes, the environment never changes, well, once it changes. The game consists of 5 nights, and the first night is rather unique, but then every other night is pretty much the exact same location. Actually, it's not pretty much, it is the same location, and they don't do anything well enough, I don't think, to twist it up. I feel like them even introducing a few new characters, which they do, and I will not spoil it, but they do introduce a few new antagonists, but they're not particularly interesting. In fact, they're pretty much useless. They might as well not be there. They're there because of the lore of the game, I understand, but they might as well not be there gameplay wise. None of the nights feel unique. I just feel like I didn't get enough gameplay out of this game for the price of the game. It's not a super expensive game, but for the price it is, I feel like the amount of time you get with it and the amount of stuff you do in it just doesn't feel satisfactory. And it's not because it's a short game, because I've had some short games in the past that I absolutely adore. However, this one just didn't feel satisfactory to me personally. Once I had finished it, I felt like, oh, that was a bit of a waste of money. There are also a few bugs. I know of a few other people who've experienced bugs, and I myself have only experienced one, to be fair, but I know of people who've experienced multiple within just one play session. And they are bugs in which you have to close your game and reload it, which usually isn't a big deal, but they shouldn't be there, and they should be patched. But it's definitely not, well, they are game breaking because you have to close the game, but they're not the biggest deal, but it does seem like a bit of an oversight. The minigames, however, are actually fine. There's little minigames where if you're hiding from the enemy, because this game is about running and hiding, and that's the gameplay loop over and over again. But if you are hiding from the enemy, there's little like minigames, and although they're extremely easy, they're relatively fine. Like I said, it does get a bit boring towards the end because it's just the same thing, never changing. However, it's a fine idea, and I think it's executed absolutely fine. And the last thing on gameplay is that there's locations you can travel within. There's Oswald's house, the kid you play as. There's the school, which you do go to. There's the pizzeria, which is where the vast majority of the game takes place. And then you have the library, and the library is absolutely pointless. There is zero reason for the library to be in this game. You use it for one thing and one thing only, and you can't even enter the library, as far as I'm aware, unless there's an Easter egg to do so. But it's such a pointless location. There is zero reason for it to be there. It's really silly. Now, going on to visuals, the main menu of the game looks absolutely exquisite's an over-exaggeration because that's the word I was going to use, but it looks very, very good. Some of the sequences and set pieces are really, really cool as well, but all of the best ones are within the prologue. The prologue is by far the best, and as soon as you finish the prologue and go on to night 1, these cool sequences instantly go from quite high up to mediocre at best, and the frequency of them also goes down. I feel like they just used all of their might in the prologue, and then to get you hooked, I suppose, and then you hope for the rest that sort of quality throughout the rest of the game, and it just doesn't happen in my opinion. There's more cutscenes or stuff around like that in the prologue than there is in the entire rest of the game, and I'm saying that metaphorically speaking, but now that I think of it, I might actually be right. Some of the references and secrets visually throughout the game I did like, and this is coming from someone who, although I do like FNAF, I think it's a fine franchise, I'm not a hardcore nerd, I don't know all the lore, but I found some of it quite cool, and I was like, oh, that's a neat little reference. And finally, getting onto sound, I think the sound is rather solid throughout. I feel like when you're hiding and creeping around from the robot bunny, you can hear them in other rooms, so you can hear them exit the room that you're currently in, and then you'll hear them in the room completely adjacent, but then you won't hear them in a room that isn't adjacent to your room, if you know what I mean, if they go too far. But you can almost hear exactly where they are in the building, and it means that if you get caught, you almost feel like you deserve to be caught. Very rarely, if ever, in the game did I feel like the sound design was done poorly. There was one time in which there was a room where someone was screaming, or it was like a muffled scream, and then you go save them in that room. They run out the room, and then when you exit the room, you can still hear the muffled screaming in the room, as if they were still in the room. So there are a few things like that I'm sure will get patched, or at least, well, I'm not sure, but I feel like should get patched. But it definitely doesn't take away from your experience of the game, and overall, I think the sound design is probably the best part of the game. But anyway, that is my review of FNAF Into the Pit. A very quick one. Overall, I'd probably give this game probably a 3 out of 10. I didn't think it was particularly good, and unless you're a really, really big FNAF fan, I would suggest to stay away from it. That being said, there's worse things you can purchase, definitely.